Congratulations, you've just found the number one over 50 health and wellness podcast on the planet. Hello and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm a healthy aging expert and founder of The Silver Edge, and I am on a mission to help men and women just like you build lean, strong, healthy, capable bodies they love for the rest of their lives. Okay, welcome to the show, folks. Today we are going to dive deep into one of the most powerful yet often overlooked keys to health, fat loss, energy, and vitality and longevity, and that, of course, is your gut. That's right, those trillions of tiny microbes living inside you aren't just along for the ride. They're actually running the show. Your weight, your immune system, your brain chemistry, your mood, your inflammation levels, it's all deeply tied to your gut microbiome, that vast inner ecosystem that most of us never learned much about in school. And joining us today is someone who's made it her life's mission to understand, repair, and restore gut health, not just for herself, but to save the life of the person she loves most. Martha Carlin is a pioneering force in the microbiome field. After her husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's at just 44 years old, she left her corporate career and dove headfirst into the world of biology, chemistry, and gut science. She taught herself everything from microbiology to genetics, and what she discovered changed everything. Today, she's the founder of the Bio Collective and Biotic Quest, a leader in microbiome research and innovative probiotic therapies. Her work has earned her NIH grants, multiple patents, a TEDx talk, and even a seat at the White House for the Microbiome Initiative. In today's conversation, we talk about the root causes of chronic disease, how your gut health affects fat loss and aging, and most importantly, what you can start doing today to fix it. This one's packed with wisdom and practical advice, so whip up your protein smoothies and let's meet Martha.
My career was in business, so I was a degree in accounting, a system that has to balance. Went out and did kind of consulting and operations work and kind of optimizing things. And in 2002, my 44-year-old healthy husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's, which, is supposed to be an old person's disease. I really was like baffled by how he could possibly have Parkinson's. And so I just kind of took the approach that I had been trained to do as an auditor, kind of examining the system and what's flowing through the system, and started with food and worked my way through food for about 10 years until I started reading. Actually, it was in 2014. I read a book called Missing Microbes by Dr. Martin Blazer. And he was talking about our generation. So this over 50 population, I'll put in that category, was the first generation that grew up in the age of antibiotics, and where every little sniffle, every little thing, we were given antibiotics, and how that trajectory of increased use of antibiotics kind of overlaid with the chronic disease patterns that we were starting to see in our population. Much less acute problems, a lot more long-term chronic. And he did a lot of research connecting that to the microbiome, which is a term I had never heard of in 2014. And I'm like, what's this microbiome? So I, started grabbing everything I could get to try to understand what it was. I actually found a young man who had a company that was focused on probiotics for cows and pigs and chickens to get antibiotics out of the feed operations that they use to make them fatter. And so I kind of paired up with him and made a little investment and started learning from him. And later that year, they published the first paper that connected the microbiome of Parkinson's to the two different types. So with people with Parkinson's, there's what's called tremor dominant, which is what most people would typically recognize, the shaky hand. And there's also what's called posture and gait, or PIG. And that's where the person is sort of bent over more like a penguin style, and they have trouble with their feet sticking. And those are pretty distinct types. And they could actually tell who was in which category by the bacteria in their gut. And so that was just this huge epiphany for me. And I translated it back to my accounting thinking as like, okay, your gut is your general ledger, and that's going to tell you the state of balance of well-being of your whole system. And so I quit what I was doing and started a company called the Bio Collective to start collecting fecal samples from people and sequencing them and making them available to scientists around the world to try to understand, not at the single disease level that we typically think of things, but to look across the population and see, okay, like what do we share across these chronic diseases that we're losing, and how might we be able to restore what was lost? So that's kind of how what got me to this point, was really trying to help my husband. And through that process, I ended up developing a line of probiotics, one that had helped him pretty significantly. But he had pretty severe COVID back at the end of 2021 and long COVID for several years. And last September had a pulmonary embolism and passed away. So
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Sorry to hear that. That is quite the journey of how you got here then. So I want to pull a bunch of this apart. Let me back up before your husband was diagnosed with Parkinson's. What was, I guess, you as a couple, what was your view on health, and what did you guys consider yourself, healthy eaters? Were you exercisers? Were you more standard American? What did that look like?
So, I mean, that's actually kind of an interesting thing. So, my husband was a marathon runner, and he had
Hmm.
been a long distance runner pretty much all of his adult life, starting in high school and cross country. So, had always kind of been pushing his system to the extremes when you run those kind of distances. And I have found some connections down the road to how that can put stress on the microbiome and the immune system. I was a super busy executive, kind of traveling around the world. So I'm not around the world, but around the States, because I ran a big apartment company. And so I was eating out at restaurants a lot, just because when you're on the road, that's your only option. And I had been very athletic in my youth. So, played tennis and was a gymnast, and, a lot of, and had done yoga for a long time and that sort of. But as I got busier and busier with work, I sort of moved out of that kind of healthy mindset. And I had also been a cook. I cooked whole foods when I was home, but because I traveled a lot, we had sort of gotten into this pattern of eating. When I was out of town, he would eat the quick, put some spaghetti in a pot and pour a
Yeah.
can of sauce on it,
Yeah.
or make a box of macaroni and cheese for the kids. And so that was kind of the big aha for me, is like, oh, we got to toss all this stuff out and we got to go back to like whole foods and really focusing on what we're putting into our body.
Okay, yeah, because that was going to be my follow-up question. Then you mentioned you spent like 10 years, a decade, really focused on food. And I guess we could summarize that as moving away from, of course, in your case, eating out so much, but just in general, the switch from processed, ultra-processed foods to whole foods. And did you find that made a difference for both of your lives?
We did find that that made a difference. And one of the things also that kind of kicked that off was my my husband drank a soy protein shake every morning for about 2 years leading up to his diagnosis. And he had given up dairy and was drinking a lot of soy milk. And at the time, I wasn't really that familiar with all the issues with soy and, the phytoestrogens and the glyphosate residues and all of that.
Right.
So part of that 10-year journey was kind of unwinding my understanding of, oh, this soy has a lot of impact, and found, some nutritional epigenetics and how that can change the immune system. And so, like, cutting out the soy, that alone, I think his tremor stopped. So
Mm,
he did not have a tremor for a number of years after making those dietary changes.
just making just the dietary changes there. All right.
Yeah.
So yeah, I want to get to, because you had mentioned, hey, that's interesting. Our generation, right? We were the first to really grow up in this antibiotic. You're right. If you got a sniffle, a cold, a flu, just the antibiotics. And of course, you mentioned we use that in livestock, et cetera. So for those of us that grew up that way, what's our remediation path? What are we doing to kind of if I was a sickly child, for example, and I was given tons of this, and maybe I'm still taking it periodically, what's the best path to remediate and to get healthy?
I mean, you really have to focus on restoring your internal ecosystem. And if you think about like, because we were talking before we got on here that we both live on farms. Well, if you're on a farm that's been overworked or had too many chemicals on it, it's not a process where tomorrow it's going to all be fixed. You have to start to really work that terrain. And the process of healing the gut, it depends a lot too on kind of what sort of problems you're seeing with it, whether it's gas and bloating but a lot of times what will have happened is you've lost diversity in your gut. You end up with the organisms that are there that are actually the ones that are resistant to antibiotics. And interestingly, most antibiotics actually come from microorganisms, bacteria. And so the ones that are resistant to antibiotics are actually the ones that produce antibiotics. So you can have bugs in your gut that are, producing antibiotics that are killing the good guys. So you've got to take a gradual approach to restoring your gut lining, to getting your gut to be anaerobic again, because what happens over time is we end up with a more aerobic environment, and those bacteria that are tolerant to oxygen are a lot of the ones that produce pathogens, and they produce something called endotoxin or LPS. And that is what kind of pokes holes in the gut lining or can, be a contributor in addition to some of the chemicals and things that we're exposed to. So you've got to start really being mindful of what you're eating and how to start restoring that gut lining. And that, there are some foods that can be beneficial there. Aloe vera, sea moss, some of the seaweed type fucoidan things will provide some of the sulfated polymers that help with that lining, help restore that lining. Hyaluronic acid, which is actually a fiber that is in bone broth or collagen, that also can help that lining as well. And then as you start to heal the lining, you can start to add in things like fermented foods and the right kinds of probiotics to start to restore the gut. There are people who have had so much damage. I mean, they just have to be hyper vigilant, because even though they can restore to some level, certain antibiotics, they've shown in the research that you don't ever fully recover from those. So it's just being very mindful of what you're putting in, and that, you're not only feeding yourself, but you're feeding the microbes, and you want to feed a healthy profile of microbes. And, if we go back into ancient history, most of our food was preserved through fermentation. And so we were getting exposure to these complex working microbial systems in all the different fermented vegetables, fermented milk, and there's a rich history of fermented foods around the world. And a little book that I actually really love is called The Life Bridge, The Way to Longevity Through Probiotic Nutrients. It's a skinny little book. You can buy it used because it's out of print, and it really tells the story of how microbes bring inorganic nutrients, minerals to life and make them bioavailable in the body. And then it has a nice little section in the back of all the fermented foods around the world and what microorganisms are typically in there that can be beneficial for you. But mostly it's species like lactobacillus and bifidobacteria and some of the bacillus spore forming bacteria that are found in soil.
That are found in soil. Okay, so I'm going to put a pin in that because I do want to come back and talk a little bit, because like we said, we're both farmers, so I want to talk about soil health and its what's happening, tie that into our health. But let's hold off on that for a minute. I want to back all the way up because I think maybe we should start with a definition here, because we're using words, the microbiome. Can you talk about and you're talking about all these bugs and good bugs and bad bugs. What is the microbiome?
So the microbiome is the trillions of bacteria, fungi, and viruses that live in and on our body. And they function as our internal pharmacy to maintain our health. So most people are familiar with the human genome. Well, all of these organisms in and on our body, they also have a genome. It's made of the same 4 letters that ours is. It just so happens that there's about anywhere from 100 to 300 times more genetic information in and on our body from the microbes than there is from our own genome. And so they're doing things in our body, in our gut, like producing hormones and neurotransmitters, which are really key. So vitamins, they make the B vitamins. That's, they're organisms that make vitamin K and can transform vitamin D. So a lot of the actions of breaking down our food into all of these really important vitamins and molecules that we use or that make us feel. Serotonin, serotonin's made in the gut. Melatonin is made in the gut. It's made all over the body, but it is also made in the gut by bacteria. And so a lot of these important things are made by that microbiome.
Okay, so you had mentioned, you'd referenced, we have microbiomes all over. So I have an oral microbiome in my mouth. I have a skin microbiome. We have obviously gut microbiomes. We have all these microbiomes. Is it fair to say that there is more, that my body is made up more of things that are not me, I have this symbiotic relationship with, than is actually me? Is that, because you're talking about trillions of these cells all with their own, is it fair to say that?
It's fair to say that. I think there's been some debate back and forth over the last decade, but I think they have finally settled on there's about 2 times more microbial cells than human cells.
There you go.
And 100 to 300 times more information from the genetics of those microbial cells than the human cells.
That is fascinating. Yeah. So, and I suppose that this is just a matter of evolution, right? That we have evolved to have this very symbiotic relationship, because I'm guessing if I just stripped all that away, I would die, right? A modern human can't live without this microbiome. Or would I just be very, very sick? What would happen if I just tomorrow, all of my entire trillion cells were gone?
Well, that's a really interesting question. They have studied it, and they have what are called germ-free mice. So they get rid of supposedly all the microbiome inside them. I don't think it's possible to really get rid of the microbiome outside. In fact, I'm not sure they could really be 100% germ-free, just thinking about how mice live. But they do have germ-free mice, and they do study, what happens between. So it's not like you just, like the mouse drops dead because it doesn't have any microbes.
Okay.
There are definitely some pretty significant differences in a germ-free animal and an animal that has a microbiome. So you could live without one, but I think it would significantly impair your longevity. Because they do so many things for us in terms of those hormones and neurotransmitters and vitamins.
Hey there, are you tired of starting over? Are you done with crash diets, cookie cutter workouts, and feeling like it's all downhill after 50? If so, then it's time to check out the Silver Edge Collective. This is our brand new monthly membership designed specifically for men and women in their 50s and 60s who want to lose fat, build muscle, and finally feel strong, lean, and confident again. Inside, you'll follow our proven 4-stage path to your best body without starving yourself, living at the gym, or obsessing over the scale. You'll get workouts designed for your body, coaching from real experts, and a community of people who actually get it because they're on the exact same journey. So, if you're ready to ditch the diet roller coaster and build a body you love for life, check out the Silver Edge Collective. I've dropped a link for you in the show notes, or you can learn more over at silveredgefitness.com. Just click on the coaching tab at the top of the page. All right, let's get you back to today's conversation. Okay, so I'm curious then, because we live, especially in this kind of post-COVID time now, where the little sanitation pump things are everywhere, and we're kind of almost germ phobic, so to speak. Am I better off from a microbiome perspective to be interacting with the world and touching germs and dirt and things like that? Or am I much better off to be as hygienic as possible, to never touch any dirt and just to wash everything and to, avoid contact with any sort of outside, things that we would consider dirty or unclean?
So there's actually something called the hygiene hypothesis that is also kind of connected to looking at our rise in chronic disease. And that, so when we're young, you think about babies crawling around on the
Sure.
floor, they're close to a lot of dirt, they
Yeah.
put everything in their mouth there. And that's when the immune system is being trained in those first 3 years. So hyper vigilant sanitation during that period, and antibiotics, of course, too, can alter the training of the immune system. And that's really when the immune system starts to figure out, okay, this is me, this is not me, I need to react to this or not react to this. And so when we lose that immune system training by being overly vigilant in terms of no contact with anything whatsoever, or constant washing, or no touching the dirt or the soil or anything like that, then we're impacting the training of our immune system, which has long-term implications well into adulthood. And that's been pretty well studied over the last 10 or 15 years. And so, but at the same time, there's clear evidence too, back in the days of surgery, before they really understood that microbes were transferred through poor hygiene. They were surgeons were operating on one person and not washing their hands or not washing the equipment and passing along pathogens. So, there's a balance between understanding the importance for when it's really important to be super hygienic if you have an opened wound or you're immunocompromised, and that, to sort of daily living and not being obsessed about, never touching a piece of dirt.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, here's a real life example for you. So, for example, yesterday afternoon, I went out and I collected the eggs in my hen house. Now, some of those eggs have got a little manure on them, right? On the way back, I've got a ton of blueberry plants out here, and we're recording this in July, and so they're just going off. And I was just picking and eating blueberries. Is that good for my microbiome? Horrible? Somewhere in between? Does it depend on my state of health? Because clearly, there's pathogens in that hen house, right? there just are. Is that a good idea, bad idea, or really a depend?
I would say that really depends on the strength of your immune system and your ability for your immune system to recognize that. And probably because you live on a farm and you're interacting with those chickens all the time, you have developed some level of immunity. I mean, I think about that sometimes too, because I was actually over in the hen house yesterday. We have some new chicks, and I was changing out the water and doing all this stuff. And I came back and I was getting ready to eat something. And I was like, oh, I need to wash my hands.
Yeah.
So I did wash my hands. And I try to remember to do that when I come back from the farm, because there's a lot out there in the chicken poo and the cow poo.
Sure, sure there is. All right, well, I think this is a perfect time then to segue into, because one of the things I want to talk to you about is the relationship between soil health and human health. And I think what happens is, first, I think most humans, adult humans our age, or just in general, are wildly disconnected from their food. Over 70% of our diets are made up of processed and ultra processed foods. Most people do not live on farms. They live in urban environments. They've never harvested their own food. And so they've got this disconnection from it. And a thoughtful person would go to Whole Foods and buy some organic tomatoes, for example. But those are probably that organic produce, which, look, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but they're probably monocropped in Northern California, and in my case, shipped over to the East Coast. And it's probably in very nutrient depleted soil. What's the relationship between my gut microbiome and my overall health and modern agriculture practices? Or is there a connection between the two?
There's absolutely the same connection, and the same problem that's happening in our guts is actually happening in the soil, because the soil has a very rich microbiome, and it has,
Or it should have.
it should have trillions and trillions, way more bacteria than even our gut, and lots of fungi. So these mycorrhizal fungi that go deep into the soil, and that's what maintains soil moisture. They work in symbiosis to provide nutrients to the plant. The plant provides sugars back to them. So there's this relationship going on at the root interface. If you have a healthy soil microbiome that's helping the nutrient uptake into the plant, making the plant more nutritious. And what we've done with our kind of monocropping NPK, nitrogen, phosphate, and potassium as the three nutrients that what they learned was those three elements could accelerate growth. But, I think probably there's an equation on the human side when people are trying to overbuild muscle and they take selected supplements. There's a there can be some detrimental problems to over supplementing with one particular or three particular elements. And so what's happened to our soil is it's gotten very depleted from monocropping the same crops over and over and just putting in synthetic inputs, which I actually just recently wrote a blog post on my Substack about the implications of NPK fertilizers kind of downstream, because we can see evidence in the Parkinson's microbiome of those three elements and how that has an impact on the microbiome and what we're seeing in the signature of the microbiome and the impact on the lining, that glycocalyx that lines everything. And so people don't always translate that, but your food's not going to be as healthy if it's not grown in healthy soil. You're not going to have nutrient dense food, and that's a really underappreciated issue that we have today. Is our food doesn't have the nutrient density that it had 25, 50, and certainly 100 years
Right.
ago, because of the way that we're growing the crops and because of the mineral depletion in the soil, and the fact that we're not putting back kind of a full complement to restore the soil, same way we want to restore our own microbiome. And those are just intimately interconnected. And the other thing would be, when you go out in your garden and you pull out a carrot and you take it in and you rinse it off, probably still has maybe some dirt residue on it, and it's got some microbes on it. But most of our food now goes through an industrial process where it's often irradiated to kill all the microbes.
Kill
So
everything.
there's
Yeah.
nothing living on it. And you can test that out for yourself if you want to make, like I did it once, making a ginger bug. So I got conventional ginger and organic ginger and tried to have them ferment. And the conventional ginger wouldn't ferment because there were no microbes on that ginger
Mm.
root because it had been irradiated.
There's nothing alive on there. Yeah, that I think that's fascinating. I think it's something that a lot of us miss, again, because we're so disconnected from food, and it puts us in a tough position because we're, people listening to this podcast that are tuned into a podcast called the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. They're obviously concerned about their health, and what can you do now? I love the idea that there's all these new regenerative farms. There seems to be a movement here around addressing this. I think the political climate is ripe for this, maybe some support and a platform for some of these small farmers to get recognized for what they're doing. But clearly, if you live in a place where you have farmers markets, you can shop local. There are some things you can do. Certainly, if you have even if you have a lawn, you can grow some things. You can make a little raised bed. I know if you're in a big city, that might not be an option for you. But there's a lot of options there for us, and I do think that gets lost. And the idea that my food's grown halfway across the country or halfway across the world, we know that the nutrient value is going to decrease the longer it sits in this distribution facility, and then it gets loaded to this truck and goes to the next distribution facility. Then it goes out to the grocery store and finally into my house, and I eat it days later. Well, that was grown, like to your point, in soil that wasn't mineral rich, didn't just basically dead soil, and sprayed with probably pesticides and herbicides, etc. That's not helping anything. All right, so let's move on. I want to talk about going back to the gut microbiome, because there seems to be a lot of gut dysregulation, gut issues this day and age more than ever. What are the main causes of a messed up gut, of gut dysregulation? Is it the food that we're eating? Are there other things that are impacting this? For example, the stress. We all live with chronic stress. What are the main things that are messing up our gut, so to speak?
Wow. There's a
Where do
lot
you
of
start,
things.
right? Yeah.
So, you mentioned stress. Stress is a huge piece of the puzzle. And it's one that I think also when you say the word stress, people think of like psychological or emotional stress, like I'm stressed from work or I'm stressed from traffic, which that is one kind of stress.
Right.
But there are many kinds of stress. And I think one of the most underappreciated stresses is actually nutritional stress. So when we don't have nutrient dense diet, nutrients dense food, we are under nutritional stress. And that is our own body and the microbes, because if there's not enough nutrients for either of us, there's a battle going on for the limited nutrients that there are. And so that's kind of one of the drivers, I think, in the gut is lack of nutrient density and really insufficient trace minerals. So those
Sure.
trace minerals that are coming up through the plants. And so that's a big piece of the puzzle. There's also, we talked a bit about chemicals used in agriculture. So there are often residues of pesticides and herbicides in agriculture. There's also, they use a lot of chemicals in the storage. So, people now have a lot of issues with grains. Some of that is because we have altered the grains and increased either the gluten or changed the amylopectin, and the things that they've done to increase the yield have altered what that grain is. But those grains are also stored for a long time. And so they can get what are called mycotoxins, and those can poke holes in the gut lining and cause problems. And a lot of people don't realize, that can be coming from the grains. That could be coming from the milk where the cows have eaten the grains.
Yeah.
And, so it kind of goes, you are what you eat, and you are what you ate. And
Yeah.
so, those impacts of, the chemical residues on the food. And then, like, I talk quite a bit about what we think are healthy convenience foods. So if we go, let's say, to the cold section at the grocery store, and there's now a lot of pre-packaged, already cut for us vegetables. There's a tub of hummus, something that we can make what appears to us to be a quick and healthy meal. But in order for those to have a lasting shelf life, they have to put preservatives on them. And the preservatives are actually stopping enzymatic action of microbes that break that food down. So if you think about it, okay, I'm eating a food that has this preservative on it, I'm putting it in my gut, and that preservative stops enzymatic action of breaking down food, then that's going to impact our ability to digest the food. So there's a lot of these little things. And then, water is actually another kind of hidden thing, because we've grown up thinking, oh, don't drink the water if you go to Mexico, but our water's great. And our water systems were designed 100 or more years ago to deal with bacterial pathogens primarily, but not to deal with the sophisticated level of pharmaceutical pollution that now
Yeah.
goes into our wastewater system. So, the antibiotic that your next door neighbor took, about 70% of that in some cases is excreted unchanged into the water system. And if you look at the environmental working group, I think back in 2012, they did about 20 different cities and listed all the different pharmaceuticals that were found in the tap water.
Yeah.
So, but then, people go, okay, well, I'm going to get a reverse osmosis filter. I'm going to filter my water. Well, when you do that, you're filtering out all those minerals. So if you don't know to put back a liquid mineral supplement to restore the minerals in the water, then you're just making that nutritional stress worse.
Yeah, okay, that's a tough one, and water certainly is a big one. We have yeah, right. And I've been sipping on mine here as well, and I'm out here. We have wells out here, but we've got a reverse osmosis with a remineralization system installed just to try and do the best we can. And it can be a little overwhelming, all the different things, right? Because when we talk about these environmental toxins, they're everywhere. They're just so pervasive, and I've seen people kind of poo-pooing people like me saying, "Hey, we want to avoid these at all costs," because the idea is, "Hey, you're a detox machine. You're the aluminum in your underarm. That's nothing. Your body can detox that. Fine, if that's the only toxin you're coming into contact with that day. You're absolutely right. However, I'm now living in this modern environment where I'm interfacing with probably millions of toxins a day. So my toxin load is very, very high. So that's another stress. We've got nutritional stress. And of course, the stress, just the chronic stress. We live in crazy political times. Yeah, we've got our phones. There's just all sorts of things that can cause stress. And of course, this is all going to impact the gut. Okay, that's kind of a downer. Let's turn this around. Well, go ahead. What were we going to say?
Well, you know, I
There's good news and bad news in that, right?
yeah, there's good news and bad. I mean, it's good to be aware,
Right.
but not terrified, because I do talk to people a lot who are like, this is just overwhelming.
Overwhelming.
And,
Sure.
and you don't want to be overwhelmed and fearful about all of it. You just need to have a background mindfulness so that every little choice you make is a choice that you can make to be a little bit healthier. And it doesn't have to be overwhelming. It just needs to be something that's in your conscious awareness that I only have one body. I want to
Yeah.
take care of it, and I want to make the best choices I can. So,
Yeah. Okay. So, with that being said, let's put together a eating plan. I think this should be pretty simple, but if somebody's listening to this and maybe they probably have some sort of gut something. I'm bloaty, I'm gassy, and maybe it's come and go, maybe it's more chronic. But when we just in general, can we put together a healthy eating plan? And then from there, let's talk about where's the role of supplements in optimal health. So we want baseline. We just want to be not sick. And then we want to build optimal health. If we're going to start with food first, where do we start? What am I eating in order to, and what am I not eating in order to have this optimal gut biome?
so typically one of the first things you want to do is just kind of toss out everything that's processed.
There you go.
And generally, you think that that should be pretty simple, but you'll be surprised at how empty empty your pantry is if you do
Right.
that. And then it requires some conscious planning of, okay, so if I'm getting rid of all these convenience, I can't pull a frozen meal out of the freezer and heat it up in my microwave, which that's something you should get rid of. And or I can't take this box of whatever and pour it into the boiling water and make my meal. I'm going to have to start planning a little bit. And there's a Dr. Terry Walls who reversed her multiple sclerosis by coming up with a nutrient dense diet. And I like, she has a cookbook. It's called the Walls Protocol Diet. And it's really nice because it has kind of each recipe has three different approaches to it. So one is kind of a paleo, and one is a super keto, like closer to lower carb. anyway, but she has a lot of nutrient density with a high volume of vegetables and certain kinds of meat that have more nutrient density and less inflammatory issues. And I love her cookbook. And then I have another little cookbook that I like it's called the Microbiome cookbook.
Mm.
Just kind
Yeah.
of it's a kind of little simple, easy, like the recipes are not more than 5, 6 ingredients. So not that, then you can look at something like that and kind of make your plan over the weekend and do your shopping and chopping if you need to do some chopping and do a little advanced prep so that you've got that whole food diet that you're eating. The other advice I give people too is, we overstuff ourselves. So just learning to be mindful and eating, like stopping before you're full and learning to pause at maybe I'm at 75% or 80% full and giving yourself a 10-minute pause, and you'll be surprised that after 10 minutes it's like, oh, I really am full. I don't need to put more in.
Yeah, I think
So
the other piece of that is that especially the ultra processed foods, they're designed by PhD chemists to cause you to overeat. And they are overrunning your body's natural satiety signals. When you do that very simple but not easy to execute or implement strategy of swapping out processed foods for whole foods, that how much you eat often takes care of itself, because it's hard to overeat steak and potatoes and broccoli or fish and beans and rice. But it's very, very easy to overeat macaroni and cheese and Pop Tarts and Coca Colas. So these things are potato chips. They're scientifically designed to be hyper palatable and for you to overeat. And I think that whole, eating real whole foods really helps take care of the how much you eat. Just that swap just alone.
yeah, little thing about the design of food I learned when I first founded my company. I got contacted by this nonprofit in New Jersey. I think the name is Manel. And after looking a little bit deeper after they called me, I was like, oh, this is funded by all the food companies. But it's this research institution that sort of, held out
Mm-hmm.
as this independent thing that's not really independent. But they actually knew more about the receptors in the mouth and the nose for aroma and scent and the mouth for taste and all the receptors in the lining of the gut. And a lot of their work is around making these synthetic molecules that trick the
Trigger
system
that. Yeah.
and make us think we're still hungry.
Yeah,
Um,
it's that is a crazy science. That there are whole companies that's what they do. The food industry has a term called bliss point, where when you bite a potato chip, the amount of crunch, the amount of salt, every last bit of that is 100% designed to be optimized for, again, that deliciousness, that ultra palatability, so that you will in fact overeat. Because if you overeat these things or buy them quite frequently, that's great for the shareholders, not so great for for your personal health. Yeah. Okay. So clearly, then I think we can say that swapping out processed foods for whole foods is our first step. Are there other just dietary recommendations? I would imagine drinking lots of good clean water would be a thing that's
Drinking
healthy for
clean,
my
good,
gut.
yeah, good clean water. Fermented foods. I'm sitting here. I have this is my little, it's fire water is what I call it. I have a recipe for that on my website, but it's like ginger, turmeric, horseradish, garlic, onion. You ferment it for about 6 weeks and then strain all the stuff off of it. And that's great for kind of kicking off your digestion. Or, I make something called beet kvass, which is a old Russian drink, and it's basically chopped up beets with a little bit of sea salt and a little bit of whey, and then you put distilled water or filtered water in there, and it will fizz after about 3 days, and you put it in the refrigerator, and that's great for like nitric oxide for your
Yeah.
heart health, and then just having a little bite of sauerkraut or kimchi I mean, it doesn't even have to be very much. So if you don't like it and you just want to have a little teaspoon, have a teaspoon of it and you get those microbes and then they'll help you digest that food. So that's a great way to start kind of building out that foundation. A lot of times people have some sort of inflammation or dietary triggers, and they can often kind of take a look at the grains and the dairy. And I think the dairy problem goes back to the grains that the cows are being fed. So if you have a local dairy and you can find out what do you feed your cows, or some people will go to goat milk
Hmm?
because that often is less inflammatory because they eat more weeds and less grains.
They're eating
But
grass.
you know,
Yeah.
they have it has a slightly different fat and nutrient profile, but it can often help to start out just eliminating the grains and the dairy. If you have a really severe problem, I have had people do what's called the GAPS diet or the autoimmune diet, where you will cut out a lot of these inflammatory foods and kind of add them in. That's a little more complicated, and it's usually helpful if you have a practitioner who knows kind of more how to help you follow that. But there are some good books and some good cookbooks that can help you if you want to walk through that on your own. But, for the most part, if people move away from those processed foods, the seed oils, you start moving back to a more natural whole foods and using things like ghee or animal fat, olive oil, coconut oil. Those are some of your healthier fats. If you'll start to do that, you'll start to notice your energy improving. And I think that's one of the kind of big things for people. If they pay attention and they start to notice, oh, I made this change and it's been 30 days and maybe I haven't lost weight yet, but I feel better. I have better energy.
Yeah.
And sometimes people, they won't lose weight, but they'll lose an inch or two around their waist, and that's from shifting the body from fat to muscle.
We love that here. Yeah, we talk about that all the time. That's really, we get a lot of our clients are quote unquote weight loss clients, and the first thing we do is say, no, 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 you don't want to lose weight. That means sick and frail, and a
Right.
hip replacement in your future. What you want is to lose some fat, build some muscle, and be strong, fit, capable. But yeah, I love that you're talking about whole foods and more this ancestral approach to whole foods. I'm guessing you know this cookbook. I can't think of it in my mind. I got it downstairs. What is that cookbook? Sally Fallon's cookbook.
Oh,
You've got to
Sally
know.
Fallon, Nourishing Traditions. Yes.
Nourishing
So
Traditions. I knew I felt very confident you would know the name of that. Nourishing Traditions. That's a fabulous place for people to start, right? I think
it
because
really is. And they have actually, if you join the Weston Price Foundation, they have a little shopping guide.
yes, they do.
So,
Yeah.
they provide the shopping guide for really where to get the best products. And they really vet the people that are in their guide, that they are growing healthy whole foods. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what they're all about, is teaching people that a nutrient dense diet of whole foods can turn your life around and bring your health back.
Right on. Absolutely love it. All right. Well, Martha, let's finish here. Well, actually, I got a couple questions for you, as long as you're good on time. But I do want to talk a little bit about the role of supplements, because most of our food is not as nutrient dense, clearly, as it was, say, a generation or two ago. For those of us that we can't be farmers, we don't have access to clean raw dairy, for example, or in my case, it's illegal. I have to go sneak and get it or buy it that's not labeled not for human consumption. What is there a role for supplements, and if so, how do I vet that out? Which ones should I be considering when it comes to specifically my gut microbiome?
So there is a role for supplements, in large part because it is very difficult today to get all the nutrients from the food. Vetting the world of supplements can
Mhm.
be quite difficult because there's so many options out there, and my expertise is in probiotics, but there's, literally probably thousands of different brands of probiotics. But what most people don't realize in the probiotic arena is there are three major manufacturers of the strains that go in those probiotics. So you might see 1,000 different product names, but most of those have the same dozen or so strains from those three providers. And so they're not necessarily that different. There are some companies that do have unique strains. You know, we're one of those. We have some of those. There's a company called Pendulum that has some unique strains. There's, I'm trying to think of, Brenda Watson has a product that has a number of unique strains. I can't think of the name of her company right now. But for the most part, you're going to be looking at something they're all very similar. But then when you go to, say, minerals, for an example, people will say, well, I'm taking 1,000 milligrams of magnesium, or I'm taking this mineral, or that vitamin, or I'm taking a multivitamin. That's where I think you can overdo it, I'll say. And what I typically recommend to people is that they're looking for something that's a more almost like a whole food. So for minerals, I take a supplement that's a humic fulvic mineral from a company called Beam, because it's the full complement of all the minerals that you need. So instead of kind of swinging the body back and forth with a high dose of magnesium, say, I'll take a magnesium bath and get it through my skin, which is a gentler way to do that. And then I'll take, I put the Beam minerals in my RO water to restore the mineral balance. But we're depleted of vitamin C. We're not and especially people who are, if they go on a keto or a carnivore or a real paleo diet, they're going to be lower in vitamin C. When you're looking at vitamin C, you want a whole food vitamin C. And whole food vitamin C is very different than ascorbic acid
Ascorbic
vitamin C.
acid is the one you see all the time. Yeah.
Yeah, so you want to look on your bottle and make sure it's, something like, I think it's like the company Mega Foods, that all of their vitamins are whole food vitamins, or standard process, which a lot of practitioners have. Those are whole food based. Dr. Schultz, his are whole food based. So you want those nutrients coming from whole foods rather than this synthetic production of something in a chemical factory, if you will, as much as possible.
All right. So yeah, very helpful. And thank you for that. Cause I do agree there certainly in the world we find ourselves in, supplementing is an important part of, unfortunately, optimal health. It just is. That's our reality now. I want to ask you, where do you see the future of medicine and technology and just general health, longevity, but specifically, I guess, gut health? Are there things in the next couple of years, things in the next decade that you think are possible? Are we going to all have healthy guts, when our kids are our age? Is that just not going to be an issue anymore because we figured out through science, or is something else going to have to happen? Just curious, your thoughts.
Well, I do think we are making progress. We're making some pretty rapid progress in understanding how important gut health is to all health, that it really is the foundation. Now, the question of kind of who owns the truth about what that means and how we restore it, I think there will continue, at least for the short term, to be a battle on the front of this kind of synthetic approach, and we're going to genetically engineer things that we can put in your gut to fix your problem in a reductionist way, versus people who are really looking to rebuild regenerative agriculture and healthy food, and teach people about real whole health. And I don't see that battle resolving in the short term, but I see the voices around the whole food approach and kind of returning to nutrient dense eating
Yeah.
really rising up. And the counter to that is kind of the synthetic world of, we're going to optimize everything. You're going to wear 3 trackers, and we're going to tell you exactly what you need to eat and when you need to eat it and how you need to eat. And don't worry about it. You don't have to think about it yourselves. We're going to customize everything, or like even customize everything and ship your food to your house.
Mm-hmm.
And I personally think that our role in our health is our own accountability and our own choices and
Amen.
learning
Yeah.
to do that ourselves. And so if we outsource that to an app, a company, then we are really abdicating what we're here to do, which is to learn to be better people and to elevate ourselves and the people around us. And we do that by making our own choices and learning what's good for us, not outsourcing that to somebody else.
Very, very beautifully spoken. Yeah, my worry is that the synthetic side, the corporate side, the reductionist side is very, very well funded. That's just profitable, and it's not conspiracy theory. It's just financial reality. There's a
Very
boatload of
powerful.
money to be very powerful, very difficult to overcome. But there does seem to be this groundswell. If you look around, I think the political climate, again, I don't think
Yeah.
that it's politics that's going to or should have the responsibility for saving our health. I think it begins with each one of us. That's you, listener. That's Martha. That's you. That's me, Kevin, right? We are radically responsible for our health. But I am also like you, I'm optimistic. I think that there's in one side of me sees this nightmarish dystopian future where, just like you said, I'm wearing all these trackers, and to my house 3 times a day is this Soylent Green made exactly for my biochemistry, and I sip it down and I'm healthy, right? But that's not a future that lights me up with joy and love and excitement. But I am excited about the thought of us just reclaiming just some common sense things when it just comes to basic human metabolism and nutrition. So we'll see. I think that those two sides are certainly, like you said, they're going at it, but we'll see. All right. Well, Martha, let's finish here. Where, if people are excited about this, they want to learn more, they want to connect with you. We haven't even mentioned BiotiQuest. Talk about where people can get in touch with you. How can they connect with you? How can they learn more?
So there's a couple of ways to connect with me. So I do a lot of research and work on the Parkinson side, and I have a blog that's at marthasquest.com where I write about Parkinson's and the microbiome. And I have a Substack that's called Martha's Quest. I write about broader science topics there, kind of educational. Some of it's related to Parkinson's, but a lot of it's kind of broader environmental health, gut health, all of that. And then my company is BiotiQuest. That's BiotiQuest. And we make functional probiotics where we build teams of organisms that work together to restore specific functions to the gut that we've lost. And our biggest selling product is a product called Sugar Shift that was designed for metabolic health. And that converts sugars so that we can eliminate them easily and helps. We've done a clinical trial with that and shown significant improvement in the markers of endotoxin in the blood and in the microbiome. So removing those inflammatory triggers and shifting the gut back to an anaerobic environment that is more hospitable to the good gut bacteria. And so that's our primary focus, is making products, the probiotic products, and supporting gut health through that kind of restoration. And then I am also a partner in a small agriculture company called Ancient Organics Bioscience, and we actually make probiotics for the soil to clean up the glyphosate and the hydrocarbons and all the things that have been put on the soil. And it restores the soil microbiome so that we have more nutrient dense food and higher yields in the crops. And so it's a tiny little company that's kind of pushing back against the big ag
Yeah.
companies, but we're kind of taking action everywhere we can to educate people and to provide products that can help us solve these problems that we've created, because I really believe that we can make a difference and we can restore our health and the health of our planet.
Absolutely love every last bit of that. You are a true warrior. Absolutely love it. All right, folks, I will throw all of Martha's information into the show notes. You guys can find that whatever app you're listening to this on, or certainly on our website. I will also, we mentioned a number, or I guess Martha primarily mentioned a number of books and other resources. I'll try and track all those down and put links to that so you guys can find that also here. Martha, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show, sharing all of your wisdom and knowledge with us, but really your deep passion for this subject. Absolutely love the work that you're doing and encourage you to keep it up.
Thanks so much, Kevin.
Okay, that's our show for today, folks. If you are interested in learning how the Silver Edge Collective can help you feel lean, strong, and confident again, you can find a link to learn more in the show notes for this episode. You guys can find that on whatever app you're listening to this podcast on, or head over to silveredgefitness.com/356. As we wrap up our time together today, you can show your support for this show in two important ways. The first is to tell a friend about this podcast and encourage them to give it a listen. The second is for you YouTube folks to click on the like and subscribe buttons, and for you podcast folks to please give this podcast a 5-star review on whatever platform you listen to podcasts on, and be sure to subscribe and follow so you don't miss any future episodes. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today, and until next time, stay strong.